How's it going, everyone? Hope you're all staying safe and enjoyed your Thanksgiving if you happen to celebrate it. Seeing as how we're reaching the end of the year and the fat man is too poor to afford any other games for the time being, I thought this would be as good a time as any to take a look back at the games I've played throughout this year and give my overall impressions of them. Then I'll be doing a follow-up video looking ahead to 2021 and the games I'm interested in, cause good lord does next year look absolutely stacked, especially in the RPG department. Though, I do want to set a few ground rules before we dive into things, just so you have an idea of what you're getting yourselves into. Number 1, this is not a ranked or top 10 list. I'm not doing this list to rank certain games over others, and I'm definitely not here to crown a Game of the Year. That's what this laughingstock is for. This is just a way for me to run my mouth, gush, and potentially even rant about a multitude of games at once, briefly, without needing to wait for when I eventually give all these games their own full reviews. Of course, this means my thoughts won't be nearly as in-depth about the games I speak about. I'm rocking the Cliff Notes to end all Cliff Notes as to not run out of things to talk about for the aforementioned reviews. Number 2, we're talking about the games that I played in 2020, not necessarily games that I've beaten in 2020. Basically, if I've only put about a demo's worth amount of time into a game, I don't think I'd have played it enough to have a solid opinion on it to justify speaking my mind on it. So in this case, the only game I won't be discussing that I've started this year is the Amnesia Collection, seeing as how I've barely started The Dark Descent. And to let you in on a little secret, I'm a scared little bitch when it comes to horror games. So, yeah. Also, there's only one game on the list that this rule applies to, but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Number 3, collections will be discussed based on the games I've played in them. Yeah, Mario 3D All-Stars. That's about the only reason why this is here. I haven't touched Sunshine yet, alright? I swear I'll get to it at some point, but I'm just not interested in taking that plunge at the moment. 64 and Galaxy 1 took care of me just fine. And finally, number 4, the game does not have to have been released in 2020 for me to want to talk about it. I know that the title, My 2020 in Gaming, should make this fairly obvious, but just to be sure that we're absolutely clear, the games that I talk about here don't have to have been released in 2020. If I played it this year, and it met the other criteria I've mentioned already, it's here, end of story. So with all that out of the way, let's get right into the games that I played in 2020. Yeah. You all know what to do. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, just know that Eden is a spiritual successor to Mega Man Battle Network, and Battle Network was one of the main series I grew up playing. Do the math, put 2 and 2 together, and check out the review for my full thoughts if you'd be so kind. Moving on. You know, out of all the games here, this is probably the hardest one for me to talk about without spinning out into a dozen different tangents that all end with me violently ranting about Atlus. Wasted potential is a good phrase to use to describe this game. Now don't get me wrong, as a Shin Megami Tensei game, I do really enjoy what it brings to the table, especially considering it's currently the only SMT game on Switch. But as a crossover between Megaten and Fire Emblem, there's so much more it feels like it could have done, and there's such a glaring lack of Fire Emblem representation in the game, which I can only assume has to do with control over the game being all but completely handed over to Atlus from Intelligent Systems and development. And as such, that means outside of parts of the main story elements being pulled from Fire Emblem, and a number of Awakening and Shadow Dragon characters being glorified cameos as
Persona.
Mirages. Aside from those aspects and the weapon triangle being shoehorned into totally not Strange Journeys battle system, this is a Mega 10 game through and through. You trek through a number of dungeons littered with mobs, bosses, and puzzles. You maximize your damage output by exploiting enemy weaknesses in traditional turn-based combat for additional actions. Upgradable weapons called Carnages take the place of demons and provide various skills as you level them up, and also alter each character's strengths and weaknesses. So in that regard, not only is TMS pulling from Strange Journey for inspiration with how weakness exploiting works, but also SMT3, seeing as how the Carnage system gave me major Magatama vibes. Or DDS with its mantras too. You know, now that I think about it, TMS pulled from a lot of different Mega 10 games for its mechanics, didn't it? But there's one sub-series I'm legitimately amazed they didn't consider pulling from. Devil Survivor, anybody? Are you telling me that they had the opportunity to use a game structure that blends both SMT's traditional turn-based RPG elements and Fire Emblem's grid-based strategy RPG elements to a T, and they passed up on it in favor of trying to make Persona 4.5? You see what I mean when I say wasted potential? I'm not trying to dog too hard on TMS for the approach that it took, because I do enjoy the final product that we got. I like the idea of having an original cast of characters to get to know and watch develop as they interact with the FE characters, rather than it just being a Project Cross Zone-esque crossover like the initial reveal trailer made us believe it was. As someone who's primarily a Mega 10 fan, I like a lot of the decisions they made, but I also think that taking the Devil Survivor approach would have helped to make the game a lot more approachable to Fire Emblem fans. And, you know, giving Mega 10 fans the closest thing to a Devil Survivor 3 we could hope for wouldn't have hurt either, but I digress. But at the end of the day, Tokyo Mirage Sessions is still a really solid JRPG on the Switch, and if you're a fan of the genre, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot when you get the chance. If nothing else, it'd be a good way for you to get your SMT fix while we wait for Nocturne HD and SMT5 to release next year. If SMT5 actually comes out next year. Yep. As someone who practically was raised on a PS2 and had a PS3 all the way through high school, it's taken me until February of this year to finally play what is seen as one of, if not the best action game of the 6th generation. And having finally experienced it, I only have one thing to ask. What in the hell took me so long? This game is phenomenal. The story is relatively simple but gripping. It has absolutely incredible cinematics, even if the cutscene quality is more than a little rough looking on the Switch. And I literally can't talk about the game without gushing about the combat. Dante and Virgil's kits make juggling, shooting, and slashing through hordes of demons feel so satisfying, even for someone like me who has a much lower skill level compared to someone who's been playing this series their entire lives. They also added features that are exclusive to the Switch version, to my surprise. Co-op Bloody Palace doesn't do too much for me right now, what with the whole world being, well, you know. But real-time style switching and being able to cycle through all of Dante's weapons on the fly, those are really fantastic additions to what already seemed like a stellar character action game, and helps DMC3 feel more in line with some of the more recent entries like DMC4 and DMC5. Though, I'll be honest with you, if it wasn't for the Bloody Palace mode, I probably wouldn't be coming back to the game as much as I actually do. I adore the combat to death, but the puzzle elements in the main story drag me down just enough to not want to actively replay the story mode. But give me a run or two in Bloody Palace with Virgil and let me just run loose and experiment with all my tools.
Shut up and take my money!
Oh, and fun fact, would you believe me if I told you it took me over 40 hours to realize this game had a turbo mode? Yeah, I don't see myself going back to normal speed anytime soon. Alright, I'm gonna level with you here. I started watching the Pokemon Presents this game was announced in half asleep. I squealed like a giddy schoolgirl when DX got revealed. I nearly fell off my couch when the demo got announced. And I bawled my eyes out when I heard the redone title screen music. I got into the demo, and I just sat there. Just sat there, and took it all in. And it hit me way harder than I ever thought it would. You gotta understand that Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is up on a pedestal for me alongside Kingdom Hearts and Mega Man Battle Network as being the trifecta of series that defined and dominated my childhood and have their visuals, gameplay, and OST immortalized in my mind. And Rescue Team DX hits just about every single note correctly to modernize the original Red Rescue Team that I dunked hours and hours into as a kid. The new visual style takes the watercolor art style from the main menu illustrations and translates them to 3D beautifully, and the redone OST takes this hybrid approach of mixing the original game's music alongside new instrumentation, and it sounds absolutely stunning most of the time. There are a few tracks where it sounds like they didn't change enough from the original song, or just didn't manage to adapt the old and new instruments together nearly as well as they did with other songs. They also changed a few mechanics from the original, like replacing the IQ system with rare qualities that essentially act as party-wide buffs, as well as changing the friend areas to be able to fit in far more Pokemon than you would have ever been able to fit in the original. The roguelike dungeon crawling and combat is as fun and addicting as it's always been, though I would have liked it if it were a bit more optimized performance-wise when running through dungeon floors, because full sprinting across a room or down a hallway absolutely tanks the frame rate at points, which is a little disappointing. But it definitely doesn't downplay how much joy I have playing it and re-experiencing a big piece of my childhood. And this remake comes from a time when Pokemon games had an actual post-game. At launch. Hell, here we go. Okay, so, say hello to the only game on the list that I haven't finished, and have no plans to finish anytime soon. Look, I'm sorry. I really tried. I gave Dark Souls Remastered a shot not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, and it went about the same way each time. I'd begin the game, start to get into the experience, really take in the world around me, and appreciate the way that FromSoft made the game world feel so interconnected and alive. I'd get into the groove for the combat and start shredding through bosses up until about Anor Londo. Then ONS watch me stumble into the room for the 1000th time as they ready their hammer and lance right up my ass and tank the pace of the game into oblivion, until I finally, begrudgingly, bring them both down to be generously given the right to fast travel at the halfway point of the game, and then proceed until about Crystal Caves and Seath the Scaleless and just burn out, because ONS drained me of my interest in continuing further. There's a lot to like about this game, and a lot I myself enjoyed while playing, but that section of the game just tanks any drive I have to see it through to the credits, and I feel like I need to reiterate this. I burned out on Dark Souls 1 at the exact same point on 3 separate playthroughs. I've easily put 60 plus hours into this game, and I've still managed to not beat it. At that point, I'd rather not force it and risk further dampening my experience. I honestly just believe that Souls games aren't for me. The combat is satisfying, the world is engaging and well designed, the voice work is charming, and the level of customization makes Dark Souls Remastered freakishly replayable in theory, but I just don't have it in me to force myself to finish it. And it never feels right just dropping myself back into my old files from my previous attempts. Believe me, I've tried that. But I come back rusty as can be when I do, and I find myself completely lost on what I was doing last time I played, hence the repeat attempts on separate saves. I legitimately wish I could stick with it to the end, but after a while, it just stops being fun altogether and only leaves this feeling of frustration and a bad taste in my mouth when it's all said and done. Needless to say, this'll probably be the last you hear about this game from me unless something changes, but I'm honestly not holding my breath on that one. Yet another instance similar to DMC3 of a game that I'm honestly amazed I dodged like a bullet growing up on the PS2. I practically drowned myself in watching SpongeBob as a kid, and I dabbled with the movie game a little bit. But somehow Battle for Bikini Bottom was just never on my radar until I started hearing people talking about Rehydrated. And then I threw myself into the speedrunning lore rabbit hole that the game is known for nowadays. And would you believe me if I told you that this remake is why I'm a fan of 3D collectathon platformers now? I get that BFBB doesn't exactly break new ground when it comes to the genre, but if I'm being honest with you here, I don't particularly care. I went into Rehydrated expecting a fun, casual platformer experience that I'd play just enough of to be able to get into the chum bucket and call it a day, and even that was a bit of a high hope on my part because I didn't think I was going to have the patience to play through it completely. And then I 100%ed the game without batting an eye. Albeit, that was after waiting an ungodly amount of time for a performance patch, because oh boy did this game run like ass on release. I've never borne witness to a combination of jittery popping in visuals and a choppy self-destructive frame rate that put me to sleep at best and actively gave me a headache at worst. Oh, and there was also a glitch that would prevent me from saving the game, and that caused me to lose an area or two's worth of spatulas. That was fun, that was fucking fantastic. But once the patch came through and mostly ironed things out, I was having an absolute blast. SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy all played differently enough to keep things fresh, the newer visual style helps to keep everyone looking extra expressive, and the areas all felt well designed and fun to explore. Kinda wish you could play as all three characters in every stage though, even though I'm aware that the level design would have required a bit more time to cook as a result of it. I just really want to see what I can get into with Sandy's lasso gliding. It's not my fault the controls on her are so much fun to mess around with. And I've heard that people take issue with the fact that Rehydrated feels very basic compared to other 3D platformers nowadays. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Makes it a pretty good gateway game into the genre if nothing else, which is even further compounded for me because my enjoyment of this game is the main reason why I gave Mario another shot and developed an interest in 3D platformers. Speaking of Mario though, friendly reminder, only played 64 and Galaxy 1 out of the collection so far. Will I get to Sunshine? Perhaps. Anytime soon? Absolutely not. Sunshine just actively looks like a game that's a dumpster fire to complete, and I feel like I need to complete this type of game to get true enjoyment out of it. Like, 64 had plenty of stars that caused me some frustration, mainly certain 100 coin stars and literally anything involving the wing cap, but I also just attribute that to Mario 64 being the literal origin point of 3D collectathon platformers. I don't think those controls have aged well at all, mind you, but they didn't make the game actively aggravating to play, even in 2020, so I don't mind giving it a pass on that front. And if nothing else, it makes me wish I'd have access to the N64 version of the game growing up instead of the DS remaster. I may not be a huge fan of 64's controls, but at least the original didn't require me to play a 3D game on a damn D-pad. If areas like Shifting Sand made my blood boil in OG 64 already, I can't imagine having to do that all over again in 64 DS with a D-pad and run button thrown into the mix. Outside of those gripes though, it's very easy to see why this game did as well as it did and why it gripped so many people who grew up with the N64. I mean, it's a game I was able to 100% without feeling burnt out by the end, and that goes a long way to show how much I enjoyed my time with it. But at the same time, I don't think I could see myself going back to replay 64 anytime soon. Now, Galaxy 1 on the other hand, that's my jam. The controls are as tight as can be, the visuals are drop-dead gorgeous, the level design is such a joy to traverse, and the soundtrack is just out of this world. But most importantly to me, when I finally 100%ed the game as Mario, and got back to the title screen, what did I feel? What did I do once I was done? Normally I'd just sit on the title screen for a little longer and reflect before closing out and putting the game back in its case, you know? Just heave that satisfying sigh of relief knowing that I finally beat one of the biggest games on my bucket list, kick back, and relax. But I didn't do that with Galaxy 1. Instead, I immediately swapped my save over to the Luigi side and dove back in. Without even really thinking about it, the game had sunk its teeth in me far enough that I didn't even consider putting the game down. Hadn't even crossed my mind. And to me, that's a mark of a near masterpiece level game. Having a good experience with a game on a first playthrough is fine and all, but it's the games that can keep me coming back without feeling burnt out that stand out to me above the rest. And the original Super Mario Galaxy is, thankfully, another game I can add to that small list of masterpieces for myself. Now where the hell is Galaxy 2, Nintendo? Okay, not gonna lie, when this game was first announced, I was a little pissed. It felt like it was only a matter of time before a KH game came to the Switch, and coming from someone like me who grew up on KH2, and by extension, the PS3 version of 2.5 HD Remix, I would have thought that Square Enix and Disney would have wanted to jump at the opportunity to bring those collections to Switch ASAP, even if 0.2 and KH3 aren't exactly feasible for the system. So, when the first hint of KH on Switch ended up being a Theatrhythm-esque rhythm game, yeah, I didn't take that too well. And up until they released the demo, I was fully prepared to skip out on it till it saw a price drop. $60 for a KH side game? For a genre I've had zero interest in at all? At that? Hell no. But, again, this was until they released the demo. And then before I realized it, this happened. Alright, I might have a problem. Quick question. Are rhythm games supposed to be as addicting as crack cocaine? I've dunked well over 60 hours into grinding out all excellence on Proud Mode songs, synthesizing every single song, clearing every objective on World Tour songs, hitting Platinum 1 in PvE versus battles. The list just goes on and on and on. I just can't stop. Especially with my favorite songs and track selection, I can burn so much time all excellenting Darkness of the Unknown and Sinister Shadows, and I can pretend to play Vector to the Heavens without crying. I'm not crying. You're crying. But, anyway, before I knew it, I'd completely forgotten about my previous animosity towards the game, and just sort of started to deep dive down the rabbit hole even further. There's something about hearing the Keyblade swings connect with different enemies in time and on beat to KH's incredible catalog of compositions that really hits all the right notes in my brain, and I just can't get enough of it now. The only real downer is that because the game was developed alongside KH3, there's a lot, and I mean a lot, of tracks that had to be left out because, well, they probably didn't exist at the time. Edge of Existence, Forza Finale, Anger Unchained, hell, they could make an entire separate Remind DLC pack for this game with all the killer remixes and original tracks that expansion added. Dark Domination is kicking people's teeth in on Proud Mode already, but I'd pay damn good money to rock out to Sykes' version of 13th Dilemma, and maybe throw in a Yozora boss battle too. Cause you know what's better than getting your shit rocked on the 104 with Nachtflugel in the background? Getting your shit rocked on the 104 with Nachtflugel in the background in 2 separate games. Make it happen, Nomura. Make Shimomura proud. Right, and as far as new story content goes, it's interesting, a little on the short side, and tucked away until the very end in a, very recoded-esque fashion, and definitely not worth $60 for that content alone. Catch the cutscenes on YouTube, or wait for a price drop. Trust me. Unless you're just that big a fan of rhythm games, or you think it could get you into rhythm games like it did with me. In which case, go nuts. Also hit up a Walmart, it's $10 cheaper, save your wallet. So to turn it back down a notch, I want to let you guys in on a little secret. I don't have a favorite game of all time. I have two of them actually, because God knows I can't bring myself to pick one over the other. I've tried. I've really tried, but to no avail. And it's rather ironic what they are, considering the two games that are at the end of this video, Melody of Memory included. The first of these two games is Kingdom Hearts 2, which, given how hard I just gushed and shilled for this series with Melody of Memory, should come as no surprise to you. And the second game is Xenoblade Chronicles. I love this game with every fiber of my being, from its tight writing and characterization, to the beautiful and mesmerizing landscapes of the Bionis and the Mechonis, to the bombastic and melodious OST that ties the presentation all together in a neat little package. It's almost MMO-esque gameplay loop, giving you even more of a reason to get out there and explore and see everything there is to see strewn across the two titans, and the real-time battle system being the textbook definition of a combat system that is challenging, yet rewarding, easy to pick up and wrap your head around to get by, but difficult to fully master and optimize. But the original Wii release, and hell, especially the new 3DS port, had less than stellar visuals given the hardware, and there were some glaring design issues, menu and UI-wise, that made going back to the original a bit of a daunting task for some. Especially so, I'd argue, if you jumped into the series with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 first. Which is why I was happy to have my jaw drop straight through the floor when Nintendo announced that Monolith Soft was remastering the Wii original for the Nintendo Switch with visuals that help keep the game in line with the style that Xenoblade 2 adapted for the series, and that they were adding a new additional story that continues after the events of the original game's ending. The UI changes were much needed and so very appreciated, even if there was one or two tiny things that could have been improved on with the menus in regards to equipment. Oh, I almost forgot. They redid almost the entire OST for the game, and you can swap between the original and updated versions. And all of the new renditions sound phenomenal anyway. Did I dunk over 130 hours into this game? Yes. In Definitive Edition, anyway. Just, maybe ignore the fact that this is my third time fully playing through Xenoblade 1? Meaning I've probably clocked well over 400 hours into this one entry alone across the new 3DS and Switch. There's so many more things I want to talk and scream about, but I do kinda need to leave a lot of stuff for the eventual review, so I think it's better if I stop myself now before I get too carried away. Just know that this is another one of these entries on the list that I can absolutely tell you right now, even before a proper review, go out and buy this game. If you are a fan of JRPGs, you owe it to yourself to pick up this game ASAP. I guarantee you'll have a fantastic time with it. And that about wraps up all the games I've played in 2020. Overall, my year has definitely been centered around a lot of remasters and ports, with a surprise blast from the past sliding in as well. And I also just broadened my horizons a lot more than I ever expected that I would. 3D platformers, rhythm games, and roguelikes all in one shot? It makes me glad that I gave games like Melody of Memory and Rehydrate a shot, because them clicking with me as well as they did piqued my interest in other games like them. Again, in the case of BFBB, if I'd never played that game, I probably wouldn't have bought 3D All-Stars either, and I would have missed out on getting to experience Galaxy 1 and finally giving 64 a fair shake. Now, if only Nintendo would put out a Metroid game on Switch that'd break me into Metroidvanias. That's like at the top of my list of game genres I want to break myself into alongside horror games. But that's a completely different bridge to cross for another time. Thank you all again so much for watching, and let me know in the comments what games stuck out to you that you played this year. Keep your eye out for the second half of this duology, where I rave and ramble about the games I'm looking forward to the most in 2021. Stay safe and have a good one, everyone.